At my grandson's baptism, they didn't serve me champagne, they served me a court summons. The waiter approached my table during the church reception with what I thought was a tray of drinks. Everyone else was toasting, laughing, celebrating little Matthew's christening. But when the young man in the black vest reached me, he didn't offer me a glass. He handed me an envelope, plain white, my name typed across the front in sterile black letters, Margaret Ann Holloway. I sat there in my charcoal cardigan and dark dress, my fingers touching the simple locket necklace at my throat, a gift from my late husband 20 years ago. My name is Margaret, and I'm 67 years old. I've lived a careful life. I taught elementary school for 38 years. I raised 2 sons. I've never been arrested, never been sued, never been in any kind of legal trouble. The faint scar on my left eyebrow is from a childhood fall, not some bar fight. My close-cropped natural hair is always neat. My warm, deep brown skin has aged gracefully. People describe me as dignified, reliable, proper. So why was I being served legal papers at my grandson's baptism? My son David stood 15 feet away with his wife Sarah, both of them watching me, not with concern, not with confusion, with something cold and calculated. Sarah whispered something to David, and he nodded. They knew this was coming. They'd planned this. My hands shook as I opened the envelope, my thin gold ring catching the light from the church hall's chandelier. Inside was a petition for emergency guardianship of Matthew David Holloway, born 6 weeks ago. The petitioners, David Michael Holloway and Sarah Lynn Holloway. The respondent, Margaret Ann Holloway. The grounds, grandmother poses imminent danger to minor child due to documented mental instability, erratic behavior, and concerning delusions. Emergency hearing scheduled for Monday, November 10, 2025, at 9 a.m. The paper blurred in front of me. Mental instability, erratic behavior, delusions. I looked around the church hall at the 50-some guests, family, friends, church members, all of them celebrating while I held proof that my own son was trying to paint me as dangerous. My deep-set eyes, which had seen so much in 67 years, now struggled to focus on the words. My defined jawline, high cheekbones, button nose, lips with their distinctive Cupid's bow, every feature of my heart-shaped face felt frozen, like I was watching someone else's nightmare. My younger son, Thomas, approached cautiously. "Mom, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I handed him the summons without a word. Thomas read it, his face darkening. "What the hell is this? David, get over here, now." David reluctantly crossed the room, Sarah trailing behind him. Up close, I could see the rehearsed compassion on David's face, the fake concern. "Mom, I didn't want it to happen this way. I wanted to talk to you privately first, but the lawyer said we had to serve you formally." "Serve me?" My voice came out strangled. "You're trying to take my grandson away from me before I've even gotten to know him. What danger? What instability? I've done nothing wrong." Sarah spoke up, her voice syrupy with false sympathy. "Margaret, we're worried about you. The things you've been saying, the accusations you've been making. We think you need help. Professional help. And until you get it, we can't allow you unsupervised access to Matthew." "Accusations?" I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Several guests turned to look. "You mean the truth? You mean what I found on that phone?" David's expression hardened. "That's exactly what we're talking about, Mom. These paranoid fantasies. There was no phone. You didn't find anything. You're experiencing delusions, and we have documentation from your doctor confirming it." The room tilted. Documentation from my doctor. I'd seen Dr. Patricia Chen for 15 years. She knew I was as mentally sound as anyone, unless they'd somehow falsified records, or unless Dr. Chen had been convinced of something that wasn't true. "I want to see this documentation." "You'll see it at the hearing," Sarah said, "along with the affidavits from 3 witnesses who've observed your erratic behavior over the past 6 months. The court will decide what's best for Matthew." Thomas stepped between us. "This is insane. Mom is fine. David, what the hell has gotten into you? She's your mother. She loves Matthew. She'd never hurt him." "Not intentionally," David said. "But mentally unstable people can be dangerous even when they don't mean to be. I'm protecting my son. That's what fathers do." I looked at my older son, this man I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through infancy, guided through childhood, supported through college. I'd been at his wedding 5 years ago, crying happy tears. I'd been in the delivery room 6 weeks ago when Matthew was born, holding Sarah's hand, welcoming my first grandchild into the world. And now he was standing in a church hall, in front of God and family, claiming I was a danger to that child. "The phone is real," I said quietly. "I found it in your home office last month when I was watching the house while you were on vacation. It was in the locked drawer of your desk. I was looking for the spare house key you said was there. You'd asked me to get the mail and water the plants. The drawer wasn't locked properly, and inside was a phone I'd never seen before. A burner phone, with text messages that made it very clear what you've been doing." The color drained from David's face. For just a moment, the mask slipped. I saw fear, then it snapped back into place. "There was no phone, Mother. You imagined it, or you're making it up because you're angry about the guardianship petition. Either way, you're proving my point." "I took photos," I said. The lie came easily. I hadn't taken photos. I'd been too shocked, too confused. I'd put the phone back in the drawer and left the house, my mind reeling. I'd spent 3 weeks trying to convince myself I'd misunderstood what I'd seen. But now, backed into this corner, the lie was my only weapon. "I have evidence." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Show us then." "At the hearing," I said, echoing her earlier words. "The court will see everything." Thomas looked between us, confused. "What phone? What messages? Somebody explain what's happening." "Nothing's happening," David said firmly. "Mom is having delusions. We'll let the judge sort it out. Come on, Sarah. We should get Matthew home for his nap." They walked away, Sarah's hand possessively on David's arm, leaving me standing there with a legal summons and a church hall full of witnesses who'd just watched my family implode. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. People approached with careful, pitying expressions, asking if everything was all right. I smiled and lied and excused myself as soon as I could. Thomas followed me to my car. "Mom, talk to me. What phone? What did you find?" I sat in the driver's seat of my 12-year-old sedan, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The November cold was seeping through my cardigan. "I can't talk about it yet, Thomas. Not until I figure out what to do. But I'm not crazy. I found something I wasn't supposed to see, and now David is trying to discredit me before I can expose it." "Expose what?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." I drove home to my small house on Maple Street, the home I'd shared with my husband Robert until he died 7 years ago from lung cancer. 3 bedrooms, 1 story, a yard I could barely keep up with anymore. I'd planned to downsize eventually, but I'd kept putting it off. Now I was grateful for the space, for the privacy, for the filing cabinet in my spare bedroom where I kept meticulous records of my life. If David was going to claim I was mentally unstable, I needed proof that I wasn't. Medical records, financial statements, letters from friends and former colleagues. I spent Sunday afternoon organizing documents, building my defense. I called my doctor's office and left a message asking for copies of all my records from the past 5 years. I called my lawyer, a woman named Jennifer Oakes, who'd handled my will and Robert's estate, and explained the situation. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Then she said, "Margaret, I need to be honest with you. Emergency guardianship petitions are serious. If David has medical documentation suggesting you're a danger to Matthew, the judge will likely grant a temporary restraining order until a full hearing can be held. That could take weeks or even months. And during that time, you won't be allowed any contact with your grandson. But I'm not dangerous. I'm not unstable. This is retaliation." "Retaliation for what?" I hesitated. The text messages I'd seen on that burner phone were explosive, incriminating, possibly criminal. But I had no proof now. No photos, no physical evidence, just my word against David's, and he was already framing me as delusional. I found evidence that David might be involved in something illegal. I confronted him about it, indirectly, carefully. I think he realized I knew, and now he's trying to silence me by destroying my credibility. "What kind of illegal activity?" "I can't say yet. Not until I have proof." Jennifer sighed. "Margaret, I'm going to give you some hard advice. If you make accusations against David without evidence, it's going to look exactly like what he's claiming, paranoid delusions. You need solid proof before you say anything to the judge. Otherwise, you're just helping his case. Then I'll get proof, I said. I'll get that phone. How? Good question. David would have destroyed it by now, or hidden it somewhere I'd never find. Unless he was arrogant enough to think I really didn't have photos, that I'd really been bluffing, unless he thought he'd already won by filing this guardianship petition. I'll figure it out. The emergency hearing was Monday morning. I spent Sunday night preparing. I wore my best outfit, a navy suit I'd bought for Robert's funeral and rarely worn since. I styled my close-cropped natural hair carefully. I made sure my simple locket necklace was visible, along with my thin gold ring, symbols of my long marriage, my stability, my normal life. I brought my folder of documents, medical records showing no history of mental illness, bank statements showing responsible financial management, letters from former principals and colleagues attesting to my character. The courtroom was small, informal, nothing like the dramatic TV trials. Judge Helen Morrison presided, a black woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense. David and Sarah sat with their lawyer, a man in an expensive suit who looked like he specialized in destroying grandmothers. I sat with Jennifer, who'd agreed to represent me, despite the short notice. The proceedings began with David's lawyer presenting their case. Your Honor, my clients are concerned for the safety of their infant son. The respondent, Margaret Holloway, has exhibited increasingly erratic behavior over the past 6 months. She's made baseless accusations against Mr. Holloway, accused him of criminal activity without evidence, and on multiple occasions has stated beliefs that suggest paranoid thinking. The lawyer submitted a stack of documents, medical records, or what looked like medical records, affidavits from 3 people I'd never heard of, all claiming to have witnessed my erratic behavior, a statement from Dr. Patricia Chen that made my blood run cold. Patient Margaret Holloway has shown signs of age-related cognitive decline and possible early-stage dementia. She's reported false memories and expressed paranoid ideation. I've recommended neurological evaluation, but patient has refused treatment. I leaned toward Jennifer. That's not true. Dr. Chen never said any of that. I've never refused treatment because I've never needed it. Jennifer made a note. We'll address it. But when it was our turn to present, we had nothing but my word against theirs. Jennifer called me to testify. I explained that I'd been a teacher for 38 years, that I'd never had any mental health issues, that I'd been happily married for 43 years before my husband's death. I explained that the allegations were false, that I'd never made paranoid accusations. Judge Morrison stopped me. Mrs. Holloway, did you or did you not accuse your son of criminal activity? I hesitated. The truth would sound insane without evidence, but lying would make me look guilty. I found something concerning, Your Honor. A phone with text messages that suggested, "Do you have this phone?" No, Your Honor. I left it where I found it. Do you have photos of these messages? No, Your Honor. Any other witnesses who saw these messages? No, Your Honor. Judge Morrison's expression told me everything. She thought I was exactly what David claimed, a confused old woman spinning fantasies. Mrs. Holloway, I understand this is difficult. Aging is hard. Memory issues are common, but the safety of a child is paramount. I'm issuing a temporary restraining order. You are not to have any contact with Matthew Holloway pending a full evaluation. Dr. Chen has recommended you undergo neurological testing. If you complete that testing and it shows no cognitive impairment, we can revisit this matter. But until then, you're to stay at least 500 feet away from the child and his parents. The gavel came down. Just like that, I was labeled dangerous, unstable, delusional. I was banned from seeing my grandson, banned from contact with my own son, all because I discovered something I wasn't supposed to know. In the courthouse hallway afterward, David and Sarah walked past without making eye contact. But Sarah paused, turned back, and said quietly, "You should have minded your own business, Margaret. Now you've lost everything." That's when I knew for certain this wasn't about protecting Matthew. This was punishment. Retaliation. A warning to stay silent. But they'd made a mistake. They'd assumed I'd fold, that I'd accept the court's ruling and disappear quietly. They didn't know that, before I was a grandmother, Before I was a teacher, before I was anything else, I was Robert Holloway's wife. And Robert had taught me something valuable during our 43 years together. When someone tries to silence you, it means you're close to something they desperately want to hide. I went home and started planning. I couldn't get the phone myself. That would violate the restraining order and probably several laws, but Thomas could. Thomas was furious about the court's ruling, convinced David was lying. I called him that night and explained what I needed. You want me to break into David's house? Not break in. You still have a key, don't you, from when you helped him move in 3 years ago? Yeah, but then it's not breaking and entering. You're his brother. You're allowed to visit. Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Tell me exactly what I'm looking for." I described the phone, a cheap Samsung, black case, no personalization. I told him where it had been. Bottom drawer, right side of the desk in David's home office. I told him what I'd seen in the messages, though it was hard to articulate something so shocking. Financial numbers, dates, names I didn't recognize, and one phrase that had seared itself into my memory. Next shipment arrives Tuesday, $500K. Usual split. David's involved in drug trafficking? Thomas sounded skeptical. I don't know what he's involved in, but it's something worth $500,000, something that requires burner phones and coded language. Something he'd destroy his relationship with his mother to keep hidden. Thomas agreed to help, but with conditions. He'd look for the phone, but he wouldn't steal it. He'd photograph everything on it and leave it in place. That way David wouldn't know we had evidence, and Thomas would only do this if we had a clear plan for what to do with the information. We settled on a strategy: gather evidence first, then take it to the police. If David was involved in something criminal, law enforcement would investigate. And once the truth came out, the guardianship petition would collapse. I'd get my grandson back, and David would face consequences for his actions and his lies. Thomas went to David's house on Wednesday, using the excuse that he'd left his jacket there after the baptism. Sarah was home alone with Matthew. She let Thomas in, distracted by the baby. Thomas slipped into the home office while she was in the kitchen, making coffee. He called me 20 minutes later. "Mom, the phone's not there. The drawer is empty. Everything's been cleaned out." My stomach dropped. He destroyed it. Maybe, or moved it. But there's something else. I found paperwork, documents about offshore accounts, wire transfer records, and a business card for something called Pinnacle Logistics Solutions. I photographed everything. "Send me the photos." Within minutes, my phone lit up with images, bank statements showing accounts in the Cayman Islands under David's name. Wire transfers totaling millions of dollars over the past 2 years. Invoices from Pinnacle Logistics for consulting services in amounts that made no sense for legitimate work. And handwritten notes in David's writing. Mexico contact confirmed, 200 units. December delivery. I felt sick. My son, my firstborn, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike and helped with his homework, was involved in something massive. Something that involved offshore money, international contacts, and coded language about units and deliveries. This wasn't small-time crime. This was organized, professional, and probably dangerous. Thomas, delete those photos from your phone. Send them to a secure email, one David doesn't know about. Already done. I sent them to my work email, but Mom, what do we do now? If we go to the police, David goes to prison, he's still my brother, and Sarah and Matthew would be left with nothing. David made his choices, I said, and he's trying to destroy me to cover them up. We can't protect him from the consequences. But Thomas was right to hesitate. This wasn't just about me anymore. If David was arrested, Matthew would grow up with a father in prison. Sarah would be a single mother, potentially implicated in whatever crimes David had committed. The family would be shattered. And I'd be the one who shattered it. I spent 3 sleepless nights weighing my options. Then I made a decision that surprised even me. I'd confront David privately first, give him one chance to come clean, to turn himself in, to face consequences with some shred of dignity. If he refused, then I'd go to the police. I called David's cell phone on Saturday morning. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice cold. "You're violating the restraining order by calling me." "The restraining order says I can't have contact with Matthew. It doesn't say I can't talk to you. We need to meet privately, just the 2 of us." "Why would I do that?" Because I have copies of the documents from your office, the wire transfers, the offshore accounts, Pinnacle Logistics, all of it, and I have questions. Silence. Then, where? We met at a park near the river, a neutral location with enough foot traffic that neither of us would feel unsafe. David arrived wearing jeans and a hoodie, looking younger than his 35 years. For a moment, I saw the boy he'd been: sweet, curious, affectionate. Then I remembered the court summons, and the coldness returned. We sat on a bench overlooking the water. I spoke first. Tell me what you're involved in. The truth. David stared at the river. You wouldn't understand. Try me. I taught 8-year-olds for 38 years. I'm good at understanding complex things. He laughed bitterly. This isn't a teaching moment, Mom. This is my life, my business, and you've jeopardized everything by snooping. Your business? David, I saw millions of dollars moving through offshore accounts. I saw references to shipments and units and contacts in Mexico. That's not a business, that's a crime, probably drug trafficking. It's not drugs, he said quietly. It's worse. My blood ran cold. What could be worse than drugs? Weapons, military-grade equipment that's supposed to be destroyed or decommissioned. I broker deals between corrupt military suppliers and foreign buyers, mostly Central American cartels, some African warlords, occasionally Eastern European groups. The equipment gets lost in transit. I arrange the sale. Everyone makes money. I couldn't breathe. My son was an arms dealer. My son was selling weapons to cartels and warlords. My son was responsible for deaths I couldn't even quantify. 4 years. Since right after Matthew was born. Sarah's medical bills were insane. She had complications, spent 2 weeks in ICU. Insurance covered most of it, but we still owed $60,000. I was desperate. Someone introduced me to someone, and it snowballed from there. You sold weapons to pay medical bills? I sold weapons to pay bills and to give my family a life. Do you know what I make as a software engineer? Barely enough to cover a mortgage and daycare. Sarah wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. I wanted to give that to her, to give Matthew everything I didn't have growing up. The accusation stung. I'd worked hard to provide for my sons. We hadn't been wealthy, but we'd been comfortable. Apparently, that hadn't been enough for David. So you committed federal crimes, put your family at risk, and when I found out, you tried to destroy my reputation to shut me up. I tried to protect my son. David shot back. If you'd gone to the police with what you found, federal agents would have raided my house. Matthew would have been taken by CPS. Sarah would have been arrested as an accessory. Our lives would have been over. The guardianship petition was the only way to discredit you before you could talk. And Dr. Chen? The falsified medical records? David had the decency to look ashamed. I paid someone to hack her record system, added notes, suggesting you had dementia. It wasn't hard. Medical records are poorly secured, and I found 3 people willing to sign affidavits for $5,000 each. People lie all the time in court. Mom, it's just business. Business. I stood up, my hands shaking. You've turned evil into business. You've made murder transactional, because that's what you're doing, David. Every weapon you sell kills someone. Maybe a lot of someones, mothers, children, families like ours. Don't lecture me about morality. You have no idea what it takes to survive in this economy. I survived on a teacher's salary for 38 years. Your father survived as a mechanic. We didn't need to sell weapons to make it work. David stood too. You also didn't give me much of an inheritance. Dad's life insurance barely covered his funeral. You kept the house, but you've got no savings. What's Matthew supposed to get when you die? Nothing. I'm building something for him. A foundation, a trust fund. He'll never struggle like we did. He'll have blood money, and he'll know his father was a criminal. Only if you tell the police, which brings us to why we're really here. David pulled an envelope from his hoodie pocket. I'm giving you a choice, Mom. Take this and stay quiet, or go to the police and watch your family implode. Inside the envelope was a cashier's check for $200,000, made out to Margaret Ann Holloway, signed and dated that morning. You're trying to bribe me. I'm trying to compensate you for your silence. That's enough money to retire comfortably, travel, live well. All you have to do is drop the fight about Matthew. Accept the court's ruling. Tell everyone you're seeking treatment for your memory issues. In 6 months after we're certain you've stayed quiet, I'll drop the guardianship petition. You can see Matthew again. We can rebuild our relationship. I looked at the check. $200,000. More money than I'd ever had at one time. Enough to fix my roof, replace my car, take that trip to Europe I'd always dreamed about, enough to make the rest of my life comfortable. And all it would cost was my soul. I tore the check in half, then in quarters, then into tiny pieces that I let scatter in the wind. I'm going to the police. Today, I'm telling them everything, and whatever happens to you, to Sarah, to our family, that's on you. You made these choices, you live with them. David's face hardened. You'll regret this. I already regret it. I regret raising a son who values money over morality. I regret not seeing what you were becoming, but I won't regret doing the right thing. I walked away from him, my heart breaking with every step. I drove straight to the police station and asked to speak with someone in federal law enforcement. They connected me with an FBI agent named Marcus Webb, a serious man in his 40s who listened to my story without interruption. When I finished, he said, "Mrs. Holloway, do you have any physical evidence of these crimes?" I showed him the photos Thomas had taken, the wire transfers, the offshore accounts, the Pinnacle logistics documents. Agent Webb studied them carefully. "This is good, but we'll need more. We'll need access to his computers, his phone records, his communications. Would you be willing to wear a wire and meet with him again?" "He won't meet with me again. He knows I'm here." "Then we'll need to move fast. I'm going to bring in a team. We'll execute a search warrant on his residence and office. But I need to warn you, Mrs. Holloway. This is going to get ugly. Your son will likely be arrested. His wife may be implicated. Your grandson will be placed in temporary custody. Are you prepared for that?" No, I wasn't prepared. I'd never be prepared, but I nodded. "Anyway, do what you need to do." The FBI raided David's house at 6 a.m. on Monday. They found the burner phone, hidden in a false panel in the garage. They seized computers, documents, hard drives. They arrested David at his office downtown. Sarah was brought in for questioning, but ultimately released. Matthew was placed with emergency foster care, pending investigation. The local news covered it extensively. Suburban dad arrested in international arms trafficking ring. David's face was all over the broadcasts, along with details about Pinnacle Logistics, which turned out to be a shell company run by a former military officer now serving time in federal prison. David had been a mid-level player in a massive operation spanning multiple continents. The community turned on me. I was the grandmother who'd reported her own son, the woman who'd destroyed her family. People I'd known for decades crossed the street to avoid me. My church asked me not to return until things settled down. Thomas stopped answering my calls, torn between loyalty to me and to David. The guardianship petition was dropped, but it didn't matter. Matthew was in foster care. Sarah had filed for divorce and moved to her mother's house in another state. I was legally allowed to see my grandson, but there was no grandson to see. David's trial was scheduled for the following year. His lawyer was negotiating a plea deal, 15 years in federal prison in exchange for testimony against the larger trafficking network. Sarah was granted full custody of Matthew once the investigation cleared her of involvement. She sent me one text message: "I hope you're happy. You destroyed everything." I wasn't happy. I was devastated. I'd done the right thing, and it had cost me my family. My son was going to prison. My grandson would grow up without a father because of choices I'd made. Thomas blamed me for tearing the family apart. I'd become a pariah in my own community. But late at night, when I couldn't sleep, I thought about the weapons David had sold, the people those weapons had killed, the mothers who'd lost children, the children who'd lost parents, lives destroyed by bullets and bombs that my son had helped deliver, and I knew, even through the pain, that I'd made the right choice. 3 months after David's arrest, I received a letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office. David's testimony had helped dismantle a major trafficking network. 23 people had been arrested across 6 countries, millions of dollars in illegal weapons had been seized, and most importantly, future sales had been disrupted. Lives had been saved because of the investigation I'd triggered. The letter included a commendation and a request that I testify at David's sentencing hearing. They wanted me to speak about his character, his choices, the impact on our family. I agreed. The hearing was on a cold February morning. David sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed. He looked thin, older. He didn't meet my eyes as I took the stand. The prosecutor asked me to describe my son. I could have said he was a monster, a criminal, someone who'd betrayed everything I'd taught him. Instead, I told the truth. David was a good child, loving, curious, kind. He helped his younger brother with homework. He volunteered at soup kitchens. He wrote me poems for Mother's Day. But somewhere along the way, he lost his moral compass. He prioritized wealth over ethics. He justified evil as business. I don't know when it happened, or why, but I know that the choices he made were his alone. No one forced him to sell weapons. No one forced him to lie to me, to manipulate the legal system, to try to destroy my reputation, to cover his crimes. Those were choices, and choices have consequences. I looked directly at David. I love you. I'll always love you. But I can't forgive what you've done. And I can't regret turning you in, because staying silent would have made me complicit in every death those weapons caused. So yes, Your Honor, I reported my own son, and I'd do it again. The judge sentenced David to 12 years in federal prison. Sarah attended the hearing, but left without speaking to me. Thomas sent me a text afterward. I understand why you did it, but I can't talk to you right now. Maybe someday. I went home to my empty house on Maple Street. The roof still leaked. The car still needed replacing. I still hadn't taken that trip to Europe, but I could look at myself in the mirror, at my heart-shaped face with its defined jawline and high cheekbones, at the faint scar on my left eyebrow, at the deep-set eyes that had seen too much, and know that I was still Margaret Ann Holloway, still the woman Robert had loved, still the teacher who'd spent her life trying to instill values in children, still someone who chose principle over comfort. Matthew was returned to Sarah's custody 4 months after David's sentencing. Sarah moved back to town, but kept her distance. I saw them occasionally at the grocery store or the park. Matthew was growing, 9 months old now, with David's eyes and Sarah's smile. Sarah would nod politely and keep walking. No conversation, no reconciliation, just acknowledgement that we existed in the same town. Then, one day, a year after the baptism that had changed everything, my doorbell rang. Sarah stood on my porch, holding Matthew. He was bigger now, a toddler rather than an infant. He had a toy truck in one hand and was babbling happily. "Can we talk?" Sarah asked. I let them in. Matthew immediately started exploring my living room, picking up cushions, examining the books on my coffee table. Sarah and I sat on opposite ends of the couch, an ocean of silence between us. "I've been in therapy," Sarah said finally, "trying to process everything. The therapist suggested I talk to you. Not to forgive you, I'm not there yet, but to understand." "Understand what?" "Why you did it, what you were thinking, how you could destroy your own family." I could have defended myself, explained again about the weapons, and the deaths, and the moral imperative. Instead, I asked a question. "Did you know about what David was doing?" Sarah was quiet for a long time. Not the details, but I knew something was wrong. The money came too easily. He worked from home most days, but we had more income than his salary could explain. I convinced myself it was investments, side projects, bonuses. I didn't want to know the truth, because the truth would have destroyed the life we'd built. "So you chose comfort over truth." "Yes, I did, and I hated you for not making the same choice, for choosing truth over family. But my therapist pointed out something I'd been avoiding. You chose truth because you love Matthew, because you didn't want him growing up with blood money, with a father who'd never taught him right from wrong." I looked at Matthew, who was now trying to fit his truck into the gap between the couch cushions. "I want him to know his father loved him, but I also want him to know that love doesn't excuse everything. That being a good father means teaching your children to be good people, not just providing them with money." Sarah wiped her eyes. "David's been writing to me from prison. He says he's sorry. He says he understands now what he did wrong. I don't know if I believe him, but he wants to be part of Matthew's life when he gets out. And I need to decide if that's safe, if that's wise, if a father in prison who sold weapons is better than no father at all. That's your decision to make. But whatever you decide, I'd like to be part of Matthew's life too, if you'll allow it. Sarah nodded slowly. Supervised visits, once a month, we'll see how it goes. It wasn't reconciliation, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. Over the following months, I saw Matthew regularly. Sarah would bring him to my house for an hour, stay the whole time, never leave us alone. We'd play with blocks, read books, sing songs. Matthew started calling me Maggie, a toddler approximation of Margaret. It made my heart ache with joy and loss, the nickname Robert used to use, now coming from the grandson I'd almost lost entirely. Thomas eventually reached out. We met for coffee, awkward and tentative. He apologized for cutting me off. I apologized for the pain my choices had caused. We agreed that family was complicated, that love didn't always look like support, that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing were the same thing. I never returned to my church. The community that had rejected me in my darkest moment wasn't a community I wanted to rejoin. Instead, I found a new church across town, one where nobody knew my story. I introduced myself as Margaret, a retired teacher, a grandmother. I didn't mention the rest. Some stories are too heavy to carry into new relationships. On Matthew's second birthday, Sarah invited me to the party. It was small, just Sarah's family. A few of her friends, Thomas and his wife. No one from David's side, except me. Matthew wore a little party hat and smeared frosting all over his face. He opened presents with the enthusiastic chaos of a 2-year-old. And when he saw me, he shouted Maggie and ran over for a hug. In that moment, holding my grandson, I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years. Peace, not happiness. The grief was still too raw for that. But peace, the knowledge that I'd made the right choice, even though it had cost me everything. The understanding that morality isn't about easy decisions, it's about impossible ones. Sarah brought out a cake shaped like a fire truck. We sang Happy Birthday. Matthew blew out his candles with help from Sarah. And as we clapped and cheered, I caught Sarah's eye across the table. She gave me a small smile. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition, acknowledgement that we were both doing our best in an impossible situation. After the party, as I was leaving, Thomas walked me to my car. How are you doing, Mom? Really? I looked back at Sarah's house, at the warm light spilling from the windows, at the faint sound of a child's laughter. I'm surviving. Some days that's enough. Do you regret it, turning him in? I thought about David in prison, about the years he was missing of Matthew's childhood, about the family that had fractured because of my choice. Then I thought about the weapons that had been seized, the trafficking network that had been dismantled, the lives that had been saved. I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret doing it. Does that make sense? Thomas hugged me. Yeah, Mom, it does. I drove home through the quiet streets of my neighborhood. My house was dark. I'd forgotten to leave a porch light on. I sat in the car for a moment before going inside, looking at the home I'd shared with Robert, the life we'd built together. He'd been gone 7 years now, but I could still hear his voice in my head. Do the right thing, Maggie, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Inside, I made tea and sat at my kitchen table. The house was too quiet, too empty. I thought about calling Thomas, but it was late. I thought about watching TV, but nothing appealed. Instead, I pulled out a photo album, one of the old ones from when David and Thomas were children. There was David at 5, missing his front teeth, grinning at the camera. David at 10, receiving an award at school. David at 15, awkward and gangly in his first suit for his grandfather's funeral. David at 25, on his wedding day, looking at Sarah like she hung the moon. All these versions of my son, frozen in time, before everything went wrong. I wondered when it had started. When had David decided that money mattered more than morality? When had he justified his first illegal deal? When had he crossed the line from decent person to criminal? And more importantly, could I have stopped it? Had I missed signs? Failed as a mother? The questions haunted me, but I knew the answers would never satisfy. David had made his choices. I'd made mine. And Matthew, growing up in the aftermath, would someday have to make his own. I touched the simple locket necklace at my throat, the one Robert had given me 20 years ago. Inside were tiny photos of David and Thomas as children, smiling and innocent. I'd carried those photos close to my heart for 2 decades. Now they felt like evidence of a life that no longer existed. But I didn't take off the necklace, because even though David had betrayed everything I'd taught him, he was still my son, and Matthew was still my grandson. And family, for better or worse, was something you carried with you, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. At my grandson's baptism, they didn't serve me champagne. They served me a court summons and a choice: stay silent and complicit, or speak truth and lose everything. I chose truth, and though it cost me my family, my community, my peace, though it marked me as the grandmother who destroyed her own son, I would make the same choice again. Because some things matter more than comfort, more than family loyalty, more than the desperate desire to pretend everything's fine when it's not. Morality matters, truth matters, and teaching the next generation that actions have consequences, that matters most of all. I'm Margaret Ann Holloway. I'm 67 years old. I turned in my own son for international arms trafficking, and I'm learning to live with that impossible choice, one difficult day at a time, knowing that sometimes being a good mother means making the hardest decisions that break your heart but save your soul.